Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Cesar. Good morning, Gugs.
So quite an interesting story here. So the car only had quite new,
Like 40,000 Ks.
basically a brand new car.
And also, the type of car it was, it's like a GLE 350.
Yeah.
That's a very serious car. It's an SUV, it's a Mercedes Benz. What more do you want?
And they were making the argument that the car was unsafe, so unsafe that to drive it could have killed him. They also added that it had been repaired by a non-approved repairer. Then Mercedes Benz South Africa was contacted, who confirmed that it had not authorized any of this. They weren't involved. And so now there's the issue of fraud for the use of a vehicle. And this kind of brings to mind, we heard from Minister Tito Mboweni 2 weeks ago, saying we're not going to cap what we are spending on officials' vehicles, cell phone spending, et cetera, But here you see part of why we need to do that. There's kind of quite an elaborate crime just to drive a vehicle that was perfectly fine to drive.
Just falsifying documents alone is good enough to land you in jail.
Yeah. This is a lot of risk-taking for something that doesn't seem necessary. And I think that's part of the public service problem when it comes to spending, is that there's a lot of unnecessary spending in the system. And it's frivolous, and it's about opulence and conspicuous consumption, and that's not what our country needs. Our country definitely doesn't need politicians who are using public funds towards that end. And I think we need to have some very, very hard conversations about the checks and balances that we have within our systems, particularly when it comes to political parties and people who are deployed by their parties. You know, what is the responsibility of the ANC in this case? Like, before we get to the law, because the law is going to have, we hope, obvious consequences, but that also can have political interference. But what's the ANC's responsibility in keeping this deployee of its to account? This has to be accounted for in some way or the other.
Am I the only one who was wondering about the motive?
What do you mean?
Because it can't just be a matter of I don't want to drive my predecessor's car. The only reason I could come up with is that he just prefers BMW over Mercedes Benz.
Well,
because
one of the vehicles was a
BMWs
Mercedes Benz.
Yeah, so the vehicle was a Mercedes Benz,
No,
but then the
one of the rented ones was a Mercedes Benz GLE and also a BMW X7. So
no, the Mercedes Benz GLE
car.
is what they bought him. And
No. One of the vehicles that he continues to be driven around that are rented includes a newer GLE and an X7. So it's not about the brand. So he doesn't mind Mercs. He minds that. I mean, it was the thing Patricia DeLille was saying, that every time there's a change of guard in ministries, we get new furniture for houses. This idea that now I'm the captain now, so we need a whole new thing. And why? So we spent a fortune on refurbishing, ministers, public officials' homes. And I think it's that kind of thing where, oh, I'm the new guy, I'd like something new, even though the previous thing works just fine.
I see no other choice but for the MEC to step down. I'm actually being serious. This is very, very serious.
He absolutely needs to step down. And politicians in our country are notorious for not stepping down when things are really, really obvious. How do you continue your tenure for the next 5 years with something like this hanging over your head, where you was proven that you could not be trusted with public funds, even in the first 6 months? But going to the motive, I think there's an interesting underlying thing here about the forgery, that the forgery kind of cites political violence and, that question about, I don't trust driving my predecessor's car because I think that I might die and there might be something wrong with the car. And it's also just, we've become so used to violence in politics and people being able to say, I think that I'm going to be under attack and I think there's going to be an assassination. We didn't even flinch when we saw that part of the story. And then yesterday when we had the shooting...
Because in KZN, unfortunately in KZN it is true.
That is the reality.
But that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is we even have such ridiculous status quos that can back up these kinds of things. So if you think about protection services in this country, everybody and their mother has a protection unit. It makes no sense why politicians have to hide themselves from the people who serve them. But more importantly, why they have to hide themselves from each other.
People don't even drink water if they get offered now.
Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's that Mbeki moment of switching out the bottles. I mean, he's a former president. But I do think that the state of politics is really dire. And this kind of story shows that in two ways, both in terms of whether we can trust politicians with our funds, but also just that politics is a toxic place at the moment, and we've become very used to that toxicity.